I am going to speak to you today about what we've termed corporate foreign policy. And one of the reasons I think corporate foreign policy is so important is that with the collapse of much of the financial system, with the center of economic power moving at an incredible rate to governments, even in the developed world, focusing on the interaction between government conduct and corporate conduct has actually never been as important. The truth of the matter is that no matter how this recovery takes shape, even if it takes shape, the relationship between the state and business has been dramatically changed. The rules of the game are almost unrecognizable. Outside of the real collapse we've seen, what's also important has been the response, a growing protectionism, tremendous attack from within on the ideology of the free market, a growing acceptance of state players who are norm providers, the tremendous growth of alternative trade channels, particularly south-to-south trade, the shift in power and the shift in mood concerning China, and China's tremendous advance both in Latin America and Africa as a major power. The impact of China, the impact of Russia, and the impact of Iran in these markets is just not to be comprehended. This tremendous shift is not good in terms of rule of law, in terms of establishing trading and business norms in which Finnish companies or European companies will share, if you will, a common or level playing field. Because more of the world's currency is being denominated in political terms. And what we're going to talk about today in terms of corporate foreign policy is an analysis and a discussion of how to deal with this new reality as a corporation in an era of what I term resource nationalism, which is one of the ways to describe this dramatic change in the basic terms of trade that affect multinationals who operate overseas. And I think the whole idea of corporate foreign policy is to have what I call an action bias. Too often, political risk is defined as an academic, in an academic way, if you will, as an academic exercise, separate and apart from the investment decision. And our view is that that's completely wrong. That in today's environment, the political metrics and the discriminatory, often, structure in dealing in some of these countries means many of these political risks have to be dealt with up front. And one of the most important ways to do that is to disaggregate the state. The more I work internationally, and I've been doing this for 30 years, the more I recognize that we deceive ourselves when we talk about states. When we talk about Russia, when we talk about Venezuela, when we talk about many of these states, particularly those states that are mineral rich, we talk about them as if they are reflections of our own reality. And this is just not the case. The way these states are run could not be more different, particularly than Finland. Could not be more different. And we have to stop providing these states with what I call the presumption of regularity. The idea that their courts are similar to ours, the idea that their politicians have the same level of transparency or respond to the same incentives that ours do, is a dramatic mistake that needs to be changed. Venezuela and Russia are petrostates, as is Nigeria. And in these states, there is no need to be accountable to the populace because you are basically living off rent extraction. And in a situation where you're living off rent extraction, the judiciary, as well as the entire federal structure, as well as the legislature, morning, are entirely or very often subservient to the powers within the state. And the real geometry of power in these states is often formed not through a democratic election, but through the history of various clans, cliques, or groups that dominate power. And one of the important things in these societies is to understand who have the voices, how do you integrate yourself within the key voices and meet with the key clans, if you will, within these states, and how do you insulate your investment from domestic risk? And how, in defeating this presumption of regularity and in developing this analysis, do you protect yourself? And how do you adopt the thought processes necessary to develop the linkages of protection? What I'm saying in terms of corporations is that to be proactive or preemptive, you have to design your own matrix of what influences these countries. Whether they're impacted by finance, in terms of international finance and international financial recognition, whether they are impacted by certain issues that protect or that are important from your country, or whether it is necessary to flag your investment with the flag of another country. And then if you get into a problem, if you get into an issue, you are far better organized to determine exactly what your metrics or your chance of success are, because you've already made the important soundings. You've already figured out which media have the ear of those people in power. And as well, one of the things I say often is that influential transnational NGOs are very important allies of business. We often have this view that NGOs and corporations are enemies when it comes to many of these states. I can tell you from my many years working in these countries that could not be farther from the truth. And you can't make these suppositions, because often these NGOs are fighting for nothing more than fair trial rights for their client. We have left our people who work in emerging markets, we have left them incredibly bare in terms of protections. People don't rally for bankers. Why do these countries constantly structure the attacks from a tax standpoint? Is it because these multinationals in these countries don't hire the best tax accountants? Absolutely not. They hire the best. They get the best advice, boots and suspenders, belts and suspenders. They get every piece of advice they can. The tax narrative is used because that's what gets votes. And this is why these attacks on people from Khodorkovsky through around the world, this is why they're framed really very, very methodically in the manner in which they are. We and our governments have lost the ability to act in a consular fashion to protect the rights of our citizens abroad. We work with various governments in an attempt to free executives and others who are in jail. How often those governments simply don't have the mechanism or don't believe it is their responsibility to protect the foreign investor, their own national, is shocking. They are more interested in trying to protect the trade relationship than they are in attempting to protect their own citizens. Thank you very much for listening.